Sunday of the month, I believe. So usually, I guess, I mean, did you guys do anything for the 10th by any chance? No, you guys just kind of waited for the second week. Usually, I think what did we? I think we took my mom out for the 10th, and then we're kind of like, you have more stuff coming on the second weekend, so relax. Um, but based on what did you guys kind of hear what my dad was talking about how like different how the role of like the woman is, and how sometimes like the guy doesn't really take in consideration the different like characteristics and the different traits that a woman tends to have that sometimes as guys don't really see, and especially more when your wife is a mom, because I'm pretty sure all you guys have seen times where like maybe your mom acts like without really any, you can call it any sense, like you'll do something and then she'll kind of like lash out at you, and you're kind of like, why is she mad? Like I never did anything to her, but then or sometimes she'll tell you to do something and then you'll be kind of like I already did something similar, but she has like different expectations, so she wants you to. I mean, so that's something that definitely happens more with like with my sister, when my mom has her do something and then she's like, oh no, I want you to do it like this. So then she does it, but she doesn't like how we kind of do it, so she just does it herself. And it's kind of like, we already did it. Why do you have to do it? But um, sometimes I think moms have like certain standards, like they have their own standards of doing things. And as much as a son or a daughter would like to kind of do, but she always has her standards, and there's most of the time they're pretty high for herself. And we even might say like, man, those are some pretty crazy those are high standards for us to kind of like live up to. And sometimes we think our moms are just like, man, they exaggerate. I definitely see that when we tend to say like, oh yeah, she's always exaggerating, she's always blowing it out of proportion. But I think it's mainly because as a mom, they definitely have like I said, like I had said earlier, high expectations and high standards. And I was reading. I like history a lot, so I was always before Sunday, I was looking at a couple of different stories where like moms would do like the unthinkable to protect their children and stuff. I mean, especially during like I know during like World War II and World War One, most of the men went to go do the fighting and things like that. So like the mothers are the ones that stayed home, and then they're the ones that kind of ran to a certain extent, like the country, and like working on factories and things like that. So we know that like the moms have potential to really like step up when it really needs to, but only when it needs to. When it comes to like situations like those, where the men are out there fighting. But then back when as a guys, when we're back at home, we also have to do our once we get married and stuff, do our part too of understanding the characteristics of a mom and a woman. So pretty much kind of what I want to I think it's more like for us, since I mean I'm not married. Pretty much the only person that here is married is Leo. So I kind of want to like deviate a little bit from that part and maybe kind of put it more into like a perspective of like from like us that are not like married and that are young and stuff. So I want to go to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. And I'm gonna read it all out. It says, "Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on earth." And like some of us have heard this verse, or definitely we've heard it a lot. Well, I know I have throughout the years that I go to different services and youth services and things like that. I have definitely heard this verse a lot. And I remember, like, when I was like younger, I remember hearing this verse and not really thinking about it too much. Kind of like, okay, yeah, just respect your parents, and then that'll be it. But now that I'm older and I tend to interact with like older people now that have like children, or they have like teenagers and stuff like that, I tend to like look at this verse and take it more into consideration what it really meant. How like a lot of the the fathers and mothers, they both, how some of their children tend to more like teenagers tend to like deviate and go into like the typical, gangs and drugs and things like that. And it's something very I remember when I was in middle school, I don't know if they still have it now, but we used to have this program called the Dare. I'm sure you guys remember the Dare. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but let me see if I can remember. I can't remember the acronym, but it was pretty much to like implement that, don't do drugs, say no to drugs, and things like that. And usually as like a middle schooler and stuff like that, or in high school, you kind of like, what, people make fun of it and joke around about it and stuff. I know there's a for the Dare thing. I think the mascot was like a lion, if I remember correctly. The mascot was a lion, and I remember seeing a meme about it saying like, "Oh, some of us let this guy down." the, um, so just looking into like different things as I was growing up, how they implement a lot of and even in school, it was more like because back then there wasn't there. I mean, we didn't have no social media or like phones and things like that. So like to get a hold of things or to interact with things, it was harder. You had to actually be more, you be able to talk more and actually interact with people. And now you can do all that through the phones. You can send text messages. You can send calls and stuff. Even though right now the calling has kind of, from what I've known, the calling has kind of died down. Not everybody likes to talk on the phone anymore. Everybody just like messages. It's unless you really know the person or like known the person for years, then you'll talk on the phone. But I think other than that, you tend to just send messages. Or even with coworkers, maybe you might know them at work, but you don't really like them or interact with them. You would just prefer to send a message than having them calling you and stuff like that. Because I've seen those reactions when like, this person's calling me, like I'll just, and you hang up on purpose or you don't answer on purpose because you don't really want to talk. You just prefer to send a simple text. And like what I was referring to is like how back in the day when I was growing up, that it was more like interactions. You didn't really have the phones and stuff, so you had to be more attentive and interact with people and things like that. And referring to the verse that I'm saying about honor your father and your mother, I remember because I went to public school, so I do remember a lot of the kids kind of saying like, "Oh yeah, my parents are like this," and they're like kind of complaining about their parents. And I remember this one kid that he would always complain like, well, my parents are always at work. They don't really care what I do. So he slowly started getting into like, the gangs and things like that. And me, coming to church and stuff, I do remember kind of, talking to him like, hey, don't your parents get mad? Or don't you like, nah, I don't care about them. They're not even home. Like, if they would have cared about me, they would be home. And, when you're younger, like, oh, dang, he's right. His parents don't care about him. They leave him home alone and stuff. You start kind of thinking like that. But I mean, in reality, like once, like now that I'm older, you start seeing how sometimes parents like work a lot to be able to provide a roof over your head and stuff. But as you're a teen or as you're a kid, you don't really see any of those things. So it's really easy to not honor your father and your mother. As like a guy's perspective, I know definitely like what is traditionally more associated with guys is the gangs, the drugs, the violence, and usually that's what's more associated with guys. From like just my point of view, I know with girls it's more like promiscuity. That's what's kind of shown more of a like a downgrade. Like how would you call it? Like you can't really use the terminology here, but you know what I mean with girls, right? Like. And usually with stuff like that, I feel like as a guy, like if you don't see you interacting with like those type of people, you start to you start to see how you decline from like honoring your father. I mean, I know I was reading into history, and like I said, back in the day, like maybe in the Middle Ages, or even during the Roman Empire and things like that, a lot was known as like the fathers would like their priority was to have a son, a firstborn, a son, so they can leave their legacy with their son. And then that's how usually generations and like legacies like continue because they have a son, and that's why it's very popular. Like, oh, they're carrying the last name because that's how it carries a legacy, or some generation is from the last name, and the guy is usually the one that carries it on. And back in the day, I know definitely the father was like, honor your father, because when you would go around there, I don't know if you guys are familiar when Like back in day history when they would mention like, oh, I am I don't know, James, son of Thomas, and then it's like a very common thing to would say your father's name. Oh yeah, I am Sir Isaac, father of, I don't know, Jefferson. But you would always mention like your father's name, and usually that would associate what kind of person you were. Like, oh yeah, this guy is Thomas's son. Thomas is a very noble man. He does blacksmith and he does this, so what kind of lineage you already fall into from your heritage, your lineage. And as a guy, it's more when you don't back in those times, if you wouldn't kind of honor what your father was doing, and like if your father was a blacksmith and you did not continue that, it was kind of frowned upon. Like, oh man, my son doesn't want to continue the the business, you can say, the blacksmith. And it's something we've had from my great grandfather, that he had this shop and we've been running it for generations. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard these type of stories. Like, and then my son now, he doesn't want to do it no more. So all this like long years of my father, my grandfather, my great grandfather doing all these things, now my son doesn't want to do it no more. So that lineage, that you can say heritage, kind of falls in that point because you drop it. And so with a guy, I feel like that's where it really implements more of like the honoring your father, as in you kind of destroy your father's legacy. You destroy like the whatever lineage maybe they had for many years. Like right now, the one thing that comes to mind for me personally is what my mom mentioned, how my grandparents from her side, her parents were here, and I was very curious to always knowing a little bit more history of my grandfather. So I was talking to him. I was like, "Hey, so I mean, kind of curious, if you remember, but like, what's your history? Like, I want to know a little bit more about you personally." And I guess apparently my grandfather is Spaniard. He's from Spain. His dad was his grandfather's the one that came from Spain, and that's something I didn't know. I thought, I'm just a Mexican and that's it. But even though that's kind of what it is, Mexican, Spanish, interacting with indigenous people from Mexico and stuff. But I thought I was just like a faraway descendant from like a Spaniard or something. But my grandfather actually is straight lineage from Spain, and that's something I didn't really know. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's a good history to know. Like I would like to know more. So he told me a little bit more about like how his great grandfather came and the things that he did. And then I was talking more a little bit to my grandma, and when you see my grandma, she does give you more like an indigenous look. And she was telling me how like her family was more from an indigenous tribe in the center of of Mexico. And so I was trying to get a little bit more like just kind of like where's my like lineage and stuff like that. And then I talked my grandparents from my father's side are not here no more. So the little bit that I remember getting out of my grandfather is that he was born in Colorado, and he also has, to some certain extent, also descendants from Spain. So so knowing all that is very interesting to me, knowing like, okay, this is like my heritage, this is where I'm kind of coming from, this is my family lineage. And you start to develop, well, me personally, I started to develop a little bit more of a, okay, let me understand more about where like I'm from, so I can, share my experiences and maybe continue and that's just talking about here, like you can call it like, not like spiritual church wise, just like, like just curiosity kind of. And it's just taking all that into perspective. Then I started implementing it more like into here in the church. And as in, okay, now that I have a good idea where I kind of come from, now like spiritually, now that I'm here, it's kind of like, all right, let's see where we come from here, like spiritually now. And how sometimes, I think it's very unfortunate how me growing up, I interacted with a lot of like young people, especially because we went to a different activities, so there was a lot of interaction with different churches and members and stuff. So I interacted with a lot of like youth people, and now that I'm older, a good majority are not like in church no more, or they left, or they've had some sort of fallout with their parents and things like that. And it's always sad because usually when I'm there and I hear my dad talking to their dads and things like that, they always talk about it like in a very hurt, like they're hurt because they grew up like in the church, and they would assume that growing up in the church, like their children like us, we would stay in the path, and usually it doesn't work that way. and just seeing how the father would feel or and talk and be disappointed about it and feel heartbroken. It gives me the different perspective of how, okay, now how am I gonna take this in consideration, implement it in myself, knowing that my dad's been around and he is known well, and how am I gonna do it to, like, in this case, how it says in the verse, honor my father, and honor and in staying in the direct path. I mean, with many things that have happened, it's always really easy to be like, you know what, like, I don't really like this. Like, I want to try something else. It's very easy to fall out and be like, I've known this all my life. It's kind of like the same thing. Let me try something else. But then I start kind of thinking about, like, honor your father and the lineage and stuff like that. Even though, like, spiritually it doesn't really work too much like that, because God's our father. But, like, just implementing, like, what is in history to, like, spiritually, like, church wise, I believe it does a big effect, like honoring your father. Just like from my point of view, it's just trying to stay as best as we can in the right path, trying the best I can to not, like, dishonor my father. I've seen a lot of, like you said, young people that are my age that are now married, and some of them are in church and stuff like that, and have kids and everything, and that's great. And then I also see the people that are not in it, and it's like, well, this guy was really in the church. He was here. He was doing all this. He's like, yeah, but he just fell out. And the thing that's unfortunate is that once that happens, I mean, I hardly doubt that their sons are going to be implemented into anything with, like, church-wise, so they're not going to be coming to church anymore. So that lineage of, like, coming to church and trying to be strong spiritually falls out once the son falls out of the church. Then you guys understand what I'm saying, right? How that just falls out, like, and like a ladder. Once there's not a step no more, like, you can't go up higher and you can't go down no more. That's it. That's where it finished. And, like, he's really into it right here. So that's kind of like from a guy's perspective thing. I mean, I can't speak too much from a woman's perspective because I'm not a woman, and especially nowadays how that's going around. Gotta try to be very very. I mean, very. I try to be very direct. Like, hey man, because I have little sidetrack, but I have interacted with people who like at work and stuff have asked me, oh, what do you identify? I was like, what do you mean? What do I identify? Look at me. That's all you need to know. Like, I'm not gonna stoop down to be like, oh yeah, dude. Like, look, whatever you think I look like, that's, hey, take it. But I'll get back to what I was saying about the daughters and stuff. How, like I said, during the ages, what's the most way to having that I've seen and that I read with history, like with daughters to being kind of like dishonored by family, is usually when they back in the day was more when they got pregnant out of wedlock. That was a very, like, thing that was frowned upon. Like in the Bible, usually when that happens, they would get stoned to death. So, and then nowadays we kind of see how that's not really like a big deal no more. Kind of the typical everyone's doing a thing. But I do believe that like I say, I can kind of see it from, like, more like a guy's perspective. And now that we were talking about Mother's Day, from, like, a mom's perspective, that I do believe they want as the best they can for their children. They want like, everybody wants, like, their son or their daughter to be. And even right now, we may not really. I don't think actually none of us here have children, right? No, like, oh man, technically, huh? But I mean, well, like, even you, by seeing the little kids grow up, you can see that you want the best for them. You want the best for those kids. It's very, like I said, from, like, our perspective, it's a little bit different because, I mean, we don't have any per se. But if you have, like, smaller siblings, or if you have, like, nieces and nephews, you see them growing up when they're small, and you want the best for them. You don't want them to get hurt. You don't want them to be involved in anything that's horrific, like an accident or anything. You want the best for them. So I feel like we can kind of see that and implement it to ourselves and see, like, what would my parents think of me with what I'm doing? Like, do they feel like, and it's not much of, like, the thing is, like, yeah, we make our parents proud, but like I said, of course, not to step away from, we got to make God proud first. But with, like, our parents, trying to be the best we can to make them proud. And I've thought about that these past few years a little bit more, like, thinking about what I'm gonna do. Is it gonna have kind of like an impact with my father? Is it gonna have an impact with my mother, in a negative way? Because I mean, there's also good things that we could do, but like in a negative way. Because I've seen mothers and grand. Like I said, I interact a lot. Like I work with people. I've seen mothers and grandmothers cry a lot and feel very heartbroken and devastated because either their grandchildren or their children are like in prison or like in gang violence and things like that. And seeing it from like their point of view now, you see how much a father and a mother are dead, like how much it breaks them to see when their children are not like in a correct path. And I'm just talking about like outside of the world, maybe a career or job or anything that's not like negative. Um, and you see that, and I mean, I see that, and it kind of brings me down now that I'm a little bit older and understand a little bit more. I see like how when you're at a young age, you don't care about that. You really don't. You just kind of do what you want. You know, you don't really care about what your parents think. You don't really care about what they tell you. Usually, if they tell you something, you always think like, oh, they're exaggerating. Like I said, oh, you're just being over dramatic, and you don't really think about it too much when you're a teenager. But once you get older, you start to understand more. There's a few when I was working at the school, there was a few kids like, and I was working at the middle school. This kid, I remember he was not doing that great in school, and I remember I talked to him, and I was kind of like, hey man, like what do you want to do then? Like what's your I mean, I know you're still in middle school, but like, what's something you want to do? And he was kind of like, well, I'm just gonna do what my dad does and work in the fields. And I'm all like, and I get it, you know, he's working and stuff, but I'm like, your parents, by being here, they're giving you an opportunity to do something more for them, you know? Why are you gonna, I was talking to him a little bit, I was like, why are you gonna go and do the same thing when if I were you, I would do something even better, higher, so I can help them and support them so they wouldn't have to be working so much anymore. You know, like, the way I would see it is, like I don't really mention it too much, but like sometimes like with my mom, like if she wants something or needs something, like usually me and my brother get together and we get it, we purchase it. Like let's see, well we've got a lot of things. That's why. Like you know, I mean, she kind of wanted like a new like stuff around the kitchen, new stove, new fridge, and stuff like that. And we didn't really need it, but it's kind of like in a way of sense of me and my brother were kind of like, hey, well, I mean, it's our mom. I mean, she took care of us. You know, she didn't never ask anything for us. She took care of us when we were younger. She's the one that fed us and do all that stuff. How what's the word called? How ungrateful are we going to be not to give her something? And you can just talk like here, like materialistically, but even something as simple as that, you know, like so me and our brother sometimes get together and we'll get her a new fridge, we'll get her a new stove, new washing machine. But like it's because we kind of see that, and because it's something that we know she utilizes. So me and my brother like, well, if she's gonna utilize this, and because I remember telling this to someone, and someone was kind of like, oh, well, you're just buying your mom things because she can do chores and stuff like that. And I was not like, oh, no, and I mean. It's not really that because, oh, yeah, so you can do this, you can do that. No, it's because, I mean, it's something that she utilizes and she uses. So, I mean, why not make it easier for her? You know, why not make it better for her? So I feel like I see it like more like a son. It's kind of like I repay my parents or my mom with things that I could obtain, like stuff like that. Or if she wants something, just kind of like spoil her in a way. One thing that I really try not to ever do is tell my mom like bad news, because I feel like my mom, and I'm pretty sure everyone else's mom is dealing with things, not just like with their intermediate family, but maybe with like relatives and things like that. You see them dealing with other siblings or other problems, and if I'm not having like a big problem, I try not to really like tell my mom anything bad. I mean, I could maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something. Like the world could be burning around me, and I'm like, hey, are you okay? I'll be like, oh yeah, everything's great, and then hang up and be like, okay, guys, like, you know, now what do we do? Like, so I try not to really tell my mom anything like any negative or anything bad. Like, I mean, if something comes up, yeah, but I try not to really bother her with like negative stuff, just for the fact that I mean, you know, moms deal with like a lot of stuff already. Why, if I can handle it myself and things like that, I'll try to deal with it myself. And then maybe later on mention it, but mention it and with the solution already. hey, I had this problem, this, and oh, what'd you do? It's like, oh, I fixed it by doing this and that. Oh, okay. So we don't have, because moms worry. Moms worry without you even thinking about it, without you really considering it. Moms tend to worry. That's why they call you a lot, where you're at. Um, Even with the smallest things, sometimes you'll. I remember back when I was a kid. I remember wanting to like wear like a shirt or something, and I was like, hey, where's the shirt at? This I can't find it. And she's kind of like, oh, I'll check later. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I remember seeing my mom like looking for it and stuff like that. And I told her, oh no, that's cool. I don't need it, but like I just wanted that one specifically. She's like, no, I'll look for it. So she was like looking it for a while, and I was like, hey, no, like I don't need it. Like I wanted it, but I don't need it. But like you can see, like they take that as an urgency. Like, hey, my son or my children need something, so I'm gonna do the best I can to. And it's something so simple as like a shirt or something. But like if we see it like as a bigger picture, we have seen there's this I don't know I don't know to what extent like it's like true, or it's because it was publicized, where there was this mother that that she had lost her job, and she had I think her husband had passed away, so she was taking care of two of her children. And I remember she would like kind of talk to her mom over the phone, and she would be like, oh, how's everything going? She'd be like, well, no, we're doing good, trying not to have her mom worry. But her mom knew her daughter, and she was kind of like, no, I know there's something wrong, so I need to go and try to help him out. And the thing is that I think this story is based like somewhere in Southeast Asia, so not everybody has cars and things like that. And I remember she kept on calling like, hey, how's everything going? And the mom would always just be like, oh no, we're good, don't worry about us. Like, you're already old, you gotta, I gotta worry about my stuff. Like, you have enough to worry about. And the mom always had like a concern, like, nah, there's something wrong with my daughter. So since she didn't know how to drive or anything like that, I don't believe how far. I think it was something around maybe like 15 miles. So like maybe like from here to Soledad. She knew that her daughter needed help with her children, so she made food, packed food and everything, and she went walking all the way the 15 miles. But since she was an older lady, she got kind of lost halfway. So she was lost, and the daughter was like trying to get a hold of her, like, Ray, my mom's not answering the phone. Like, what do I do? But the mom was walking to kind of help her feed her children, but she had gotten lost halfway. So I guess she, for somehow or another, she was able to find her way to her daughter's house, and her daughter had already gone to the police and things like that. And I mean, the mom eventually showed up, and she was like, hey, where were you? Like, we sent out police to look for you and this and that. And she was like, well, I heard you, and I knew you needed help with feeding your children, so I made food and I brought you food. And the daughter was like, what? Like, I told you not to, like, kind of getting mad at her. But the mom's all like, I know you need help, like. And so I don't know to what extent the story is accurate, but like, I guess in the end the daughter like wrote a letter saying like all these struggles that as the daughter was going through, trying to feed her children, and seeing how her mom did all she could to feed her daughter, so it kind of like what do you call it, like a domino effect, where the mom was taking all this extent to walk and feed her daughter, and the daughter was doing all these crazy jobs to feed her children. So you can see how the domino effect falls, how like mothers really do care for their children, for their daughters. And going back to what I was saying about like how honor, like for the guys honoring their father, and for like more like women and daughters honoring their mothers, being like lovable, being caring. I think that's something now that we see nowadays, that's not really a common thing. We always hear the strong, independent woman, the boss babe and all that stuff. You hear all these things, and a lot of the time, a lot of these ideas fall into like, it's all about me. Like, I want to do my thing. I don't need anybody else. Very egotistic. And it takes away a lot of that, from what I see, or from what I can say, is it takes away a lot of that feminine love and that feminine touch, because it's always like, oh, it's very egotistic, because it's a very, I could say, like a masculine trait. Because usually for guys, it's more of a, I want to be successful, I want to do this. But the whole reason a guy wants to be successful and have a good job and pay for all this, it's not so he can go out and do his own thing and stuff. But in the end, it's to be able to provide for a family, be able to provide for his wife and his children. And usually with the woman, when she tends to like have that mentality, oh, I want to be a boss babe and this and that, it's more egocentric, and they're buying themselves things because they're saying, I don't need a guy for this, I don't need people for this because I can do it on my own. But it's always very like in a selfish way, not trying to prove a point. It's not much of doing it so they can provide for her like family, because half the time those women don't want husbands because they don't want a man. So obviously if you don't have a guy, you can't have a family. So it's a very like egocentric type of mentality. And it's also very masculine, because I forgot the study of what percentage of I think it was, no, I don't want to give you wrong numbers, but it was a high percentage of like women that are over their 50s that got into like some crazy career, end up being alone. And at that age, I mean, it's harder to find a guy to create a family with. And usually by the age of 50 and stuff, the women in their bodies, that they can't really have children like they would. It's a very high risk. So a lot of them end up being alone, and just being alone. And that's what the very famous thing about women with cats, because they can have, well, not that they can't, but they decide not to have children, or maybe some of them can't. So what do? They get a bunch of cats. I don't know if you guys have heard that before. Oh, you always hear the term, oh, that old cat lady, because she's by herself. All she has is cats. So I feel like that, back to what I was saying, how the way guys honor their fathers and the way daughters honor their mothers, it's very different, but at the same time similar. And the other verse that I want to read is in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 20 to 22. I'm going to read out loud. It says, my son, keep your father's command and do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart, tie them around your neck, and when you roam, they will lead you. And when you sleep, they will keep you. And when you awake, they will speak with you. So right here we can see how we sometimes tend to, when our parents give us advice, we tend to kind of sometimes ignore it or not paying attention to it. And I believe, I mean, like I said, I don't have insurance, so I can't really say, but I do believe to an extent, there's no real handbook, or there's no like instruction list on how to be a parent. There really isn't. Usually there's like a saying that like the oldest is the one that gets all the, I don't want to say abuse, because that's not what I mean, but like gets all it's a test subject, Like, sometimes parents don't know. When you're a first parent, you don't know how to be a parent. So you're the firstborn is a test subject. You tend to, I don't know, yell at him more or her more, or have him do a bunch of things more. So they tend to be the test subject. Then if you get a second child, then they have a better idea how to make things work. And usually the older child helps the middle and the youngers, because they kind of their parents were learning how to be a parent, and then the firstborn is always like learning with them, like they're experiencing for the first time parenting as the parents are. I don't know if you guys know what I mean. So it's always easy to see sometimes the older being the one like taking care of people, especially like if your firstborn is a daughter. She always thinks she's like the manager of the family, like she's always, yeah, right. I mean, I've seen that a lot. Like she thinks she manages. All right, we're gonna. Like, let's say I've heard the story where this family, I think it was a family of like 5 or 6, and they were going to take a trip, like a vacation, and they're like, all right, we'll get the tickets. And the oldest daughter, she was like, okay, let's get the tickets. All right, you're going to do here, you got this. And she was just like with her phone and like just telling everybody what to do, like being the manager of the family, And it's kind of funny because it's kind of true, because I definitely see it with some of my cousins and stuff, how they're the oldest, and they're the ones that try to manage the family and stuff. But back to what I was going to, how sometimes the firstborn is the one that gets the first inclination of being the test subject. That's what I call it. and usually it all falls through. But like I said, when we're at a young age, our parents give us advice and tell us things, and sometimes we listen to them, sometimes we don't. I know me growing up, I remember for the most part listening to my parents, but there was a few times where I was kind of like, oh, that's over exaggerating, like, oh, that's too much, or like, oh, is it? And then the thing that would always be like, oh, that was back in the day, now it's modern times, that was big. That's when you did it back in the day. But now that I get older, it's kind of like, hey, they go pretty hand in hand. So like this, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just that nowadays, like back in the day, it was more going outside with friends, going to the park, and like, hey, who are you hanging out with? Because you would be going out, hanging out with people. There was no phones and stuff like that. Nowadays, it's kind of like the same thing, but it's kind of like, hey, who are you talking to over the phone, or what are you doing with your phone? Like, who are you interacting with on your phone? It's kind of like similar, but it's different because it's different times. But PTSD, huh? So you see how like different things have always changed, but like the times change, but the message or the discipline kind of stays the same. And for the most part, we can always remember how our parents are always telling us, like, don't hang out with bad people, don't do bad things, and that's just like outside the church. Now, when you're in church, it's kind of like a little bit more, I believe, for us, it's more like responsibility because we're in church and we don't just hear like our parents telling us at home, but when we come to church, we listen to the message that's been given to the service. And I mean, like me, I went to a bunch of different like youth groups and things like that. So I heard a lot of different ideas and perspectives from different people. So it would be a little bit more disappointing if I kind of fell into, let's say drugs or something like that, because I would be like, I should have known. It's like that one thing where you heard that saying, you take the horse to drink water, but you can't make the horse drink. It's kind of like, hey, all the materials here, all the warnings are here. The Bible, that's our guide. Like that's all. If you need any sort of guidance that you believe you're not having from someone, you have the Bible. Like you have all the tools you need, and then to still fall, it's kind of like, man, dude, like you're an idiot, like how do you have all these tools and all these things to be in the right path and still not stay on the right path? But then it goes back to the whole thing where we can depends who we hang out with, depends what we hear, what we listen, what we watch, everything. It always has it could have either a positive effect or negative effect. Sometimes it's just even curiosity, the famous saying, curiosity killed the cat, Sometimes it's just being curious of like, I have never experienced that, so I want to try. I don't think it should hurt. Sometimes I've seen some people say and do things like that, and sometimes they'll be like, oh yeah, no, definitely, I'm not doing that again. And then I have some people who just fall into that. The most common thing right now is, especially here in California, ever since, they made weed legal. Before it was a very like, oh, like bad. And now it's like, oh yeah, it's legal, it's medicine, oh yeah, do this and that. So it's easier for like people in the church to be like, yeah, maybe it's just medicine, let me try it. Because it's not frowned upon as much by society like it was back then. But you should know better than, not to try that, because it's, some people call it, or some people say it is, and some people say it's not. Some people say it's like the gateway drug to do other things, and then some people are like, oh no, it's just exaggerating. But then from my experience of like talking with people, when I used to work with at the horse sanctuary, there was this guy. He was like in his late 30s, like 38. He was one of those guys that would like smoke all the time in the morning, in the afternoon, all the time. And then I was like, hey, I kind of brought that up, like, hey, isn't that like the gateway to other drugs? Like, oh no, I don't do anything else. I just do this. And I was like, oh, okay. But I mean, at work, he maybe there's like 4 people that interacted that had that same encounter, but he couldn't remember things. He just couldn't remember things. It's funny, but we each horses had different type of feed, and at first, you don't know what. Okay, this one wants grain, this one wants oats. You don't remember in the beginning, but after you do it so much, you get the idea. Oh yeah, this guy's Charlie. He likes oats. So you memorize. You get the idea of the horses and stuff like that. Well, this guy couldn't get it. And I'm like, hey, feed the horses. He's like, oh, I can't remember. I was like, how do you not remember, man? You've been here for like months. He's like, I just can't remember. And I was all like, but why? Like, it's only like 10 horses. How can you not remember? He's like, I just can't. And I was like, man, dude, like, you see, you need to stop. You need to stop smoking that. And he's all like, oh no, it's not that. It's not that. I was like, well, dude, like, it's like so simple task. How can you not remember? And he was all like, I just can't. And I was all like, you see, dude, like, okay, maybe you may not be doing other drugs, but like I can definitely, as a witness, see that this one is definitely impacting your memory because you can't remember simple tasks. I remember this one's kind of funny, but another guy, same thing, always doing the same thing, and it was at the same job. I was driving the tractor, and I was going. There was like a mountain. It was kind of steep, so I had a lot of steep hills. And he had a little golf cart, and I told him, "Hey, let the horse out. No, open the gate so I can drive up with the tractor, but make sure you keep an eye on the horse so it doesn't go out." And he's all like, "Oh, okay." So I'm driving with the tractor, listening to some country music. And once I'm getting up on the hill, I see him drive up, ding, the little golf cart. He parks. And then he gets down, and then he's like with the horse, like trying to scare him. But then the golf cart starts coming down, and I'm all like, "Hey, the golf cart!" He's like, "Oh crap!" So he runs, gets to the golf cart, but then the horse starts coming down. So he's kind of like, "Oh." Then he's all like, so he goes out back to the horse, and the go kart starts coming more down. And I'm kind of like, "Dude, like go close the gate so you can put the brake on the golf cart, and then you can scare the horse, and then open the gate." Oh, I didn't think of that. And I was all like, dude, you're like, how does your brain work? Like, I would get mad. I would get mad right there because I'll be like, and then it was funny because once I started getting closer, he had he had one hand on the golf cart and then the other hand on the horse. Like, what do I do? Like, I had to turn off the tractor, get down, and do everything. And then I'm like, dude, like, how do you have trouble doing like these type of tasks? Like, it wasn't hard. All you had to do this first and this and that. And then he would be like, I just can't, man. Like, I was like, dude, man, like. And the reason I'm saying this because like nowadays it's like a legal thing, like it's very popular and common, and everyone does it, and oh yeah, it's normal. There's now, I mean, back then it was just the herb. Now there's a bunch of waxes and a bunch of different ways to do it, so it's a very common thing. And unfortunately, I've heard and seen a lot of people that like are in like in the church saying like, oh yeah, what's legal? My dad, remember, he told me that, oh, it's not bad no more, it's legal now. So if it's legal, it's not bad, And it's like, no, dude, like, it doesn't work like that, I know it's like a little bit off track, but you see it's already 1:21. Let me go with this last verse. I mean, so this last verse that I want to read is in Matthew 15:4. And it goes, I'll just read it aloud, and it says, "For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and then he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death." So you can kind of see what's the consequences of that. All the verses that I've been reading, it's always listen to your father, honor your father and your mother, be with your respect them and things like that. And then what happens if you don't? He who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. So that I think a lot of people don't take this verse into like a lot of consideration. How, and I have gotten feedback of some people saying like, well, yeah, but my dad's not the best. He used to beat me up and stuff like that. And I'll be like, I understand that those are situations that are very difficult, and it doesn't have like a yes or no answer. But overall, like it says, don't curse your father and your mother. So in other words, the way I would take it is kind of like, just be respectful and then keep your distance. That's the best way that I would approach something like that, because every situation is different. There's some fathers up there and mothers up there who just didn't grow up with a father and a mother, and then didn't have that love and care. So they don't really show that to their children. And it's just kind of a thing that keeps on passing on. So it's a very hard thing to kind of like, oh yeah, well, how am I going to honor my father or my mother when they're like this with me? And those are like situations that are very difficult to kind of give like a yes and no answer. But at the same time, that's why we have the Bible to guide us, help us. And then there's people around us, that we could always ask for guidance and stuff. Just because we have a problem or an issue, that does not mean that we can just deviate like, oh, well, it is what it is. It's kind of like, no, dude, like try try to put in some work into it. Like actually try to talk to people and pray and fast and put in some work, because I mean you can't just because another different like story is been going to the gym and stuff. There was this guy who was saying like, oh man, like I've been going for like a couple of years, but I don't really see much of a change and stuff like that. And then there was this other guy who was really fit and everything. He's like, well, look at that guy, he's really fit and stuff. He probably has the genetics and the money to be buying supplements, to be buying proteins and pre-workouts and all these things, so maybe he has a better chance to get in shape, and I don't have any money for that, and I've been going for a while, but I don't really see much of a difference. And I think it's because he has more of a chance because he has money to buy better gyms, better equipment. And it's kind of like, well, no, dude, you just got to work harder than the other guy. Like, it sucks, but that's just how it is, man. You by seeing the other guy being prosperous and let's say being able to have money to buy all these supplements and going to great gyms, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. You just got to work harder than him, man. I mean, you just got to work harder than him. That's pretty much the only thing you could do. Because instead of complaining and nagging that, like, oh, well, he has this and he has that, like, well, dude, just work harder. I mean, it sucks, but hey, man, you just got to work harder. You can't just. Another analogy that I like that I remember seeing is how this guy goes to a car dealership and he wants to buy the brand new, let's say, a Mercedes. And he's like, hey, man, well, I had a tough life, I didn't really have money growing up, so I think by me having all these struggles, you should feel sorry for me and give me the car. And it's like, no, the dealership is not going to give you the car because of your problems. They're not. It's like, how about instead of complain about it, how about you put in the extra work, and so at the end you could afford it and get it. A lot of us try not to really put in the work and stuff. So what I'm trying to lead to is how sometimes when it comes to certain situations, like what I was saying with the parents and stuff, is how sometimes, we may not be in the position or in the best, or growing up in a family that is not church oriented, where there's no Christian values or anything like that. And instead of just complain about it, like I'm pretty sure you guys have heard that story of how there's an alcoholic father and he has two sons, and how one turns to be a successful businessman and the other son ends up turning to be an alcoholic like his father. And at the end, it's just mostly like perspective and seeing how taking things from a different point of view instead of just like taking all the negative. Like instead of maybe using something bad that's happening as a way to like, oh, well, it's all bad and negative, use it as a fire, as a fuel to try to do better, or, to try to not be like that and not be a certain person. And sometimes I feel like in the family households, like I was going back to the whole do not, like it says in the verse, he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. And that's what I'm kind of want to lead to, how it's for people that do not grow up in a strong family household, it's easy for you to curse father or mother. But like us that have been in the church and things like that, and sometimes, like it could be, I've heard stories where, there's people that come here to church and stuff, but back at home, it's a completely different story. I've heard many stories and testimonies of people like that, you might see them here happily and stuff, but when they go back home, it's a completely different story. So like as kids growing up, teenagers and stuff, it's really easy to kind of deviate from saying like, he who curses his father. It's like, well, I mean, he's a hypocrite. He does this, he does that. But especially now that we're here in church and stuff, I do believe how the verse says that he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. So just like, and that's just like in the human way. Now, I mean, what I want to finish off with is let's take it more as like the spiritual way, like he who curses his father, like sometimes we might be in situations and we tend to like complain to God, like, oh, why am I in this position, or why does this happen to me? And you tend to be like, oh, no, God is this. You start just complaining, and I feel like that's kind of an outcome of you not respecting like your human nature of your parents. So you find it easy to like not respect God. It's kind of like a domino effect, how I see it. Like, one goes in hand with the other. If you usually tend to have good relationships with your parents in a Christian household, you'll have a higher chance of having a great relationship with God. Because, as you're a kid growing up, you don't really know too much about, church. You're just here because your parents are here. But after a certain age, you start maturing and seeing things from your point of view. And I do believe if parents did a great job in showing their kids how to show respect to themselves and stuff, then the teenagers, kids will respect themselves, and in that way, respect God, and show not be one of those people that like, oh, well, he goes to church, but he does all this and does all that. Show some, as they call it, show some self-respect. And it's already time. I mean, they went by pretty quick. There were some parts where I wanted it to like expand more, but if I did, I wasn't going to be able to get to another part. So, I mean, for the next part, for sure, let's see what else we can get going. But for the most part, what I kind of want to just finish off with is make sure we honor our parents, especially today. It's Mother's Day, so we've been showing, especially at church, that extra affection to our moms. So we go to the park, be with our moms and things like that. But that's all I want to say, and we can stand up for a quick prayer.